Psalm 88 is where we are. We're continuing this series that we've been in for a handful of weeks now called Desert Songs. And if you haven't been here or new to City Church, we are taking select psalms that were written during what we're calling desert seasons of life, wilderness seasons of life. And we're seeking to understand what the scriptures have to say to us during these seasons of life. And Psalm 88 is an unusual one, a dark psalm that we'll dive into in just a moment. If you have a middle school, high school, recent graduate in the education system, there is a strong possibility that they were asked to read. Notice I said asked to read. They didn't necessarily read it, but they were asked to read a little novel, a post-apocalyptic drama written by a guy named Cormac McCarthy named The Road, called The Road. This was turned into a movie in 2009. It was a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. The film version of this stars Viggo Mortensen, who was maybe more known for being Aragorn in Lord of the Rings series. But in the film, he is a father who has a young son, and they're traveling through a desolate, ash-covered America after some unspecified disaster has basically destroyed civilization. And the man and his son struggle. They struggle to survive in a world that is devoid of animals, crops, any kind of structured society. And their goal in the book and in the movie is to reach the coast. And they're hoping that they might find some warmth there and some hope there, even though the father is very suspicious that this is not the case. And along the way, they scavenge for food and shelter. They encounter kind of these remnants of humanity that are left. They encounter dangerous cannibalistic groups or gangs. And to be honest with you, the movie is very bleak. It is haunting. It is emotionally raw. There's very little dialogue, and the visuals of this film emphasize the grimness of a dying world. It's considered one of the most powerful depictions of a post-apocalyptic life, devastating, and then glimpses of humanity. And I have to warn you, it's not a rom-com, so if you're looking for something to cheer you up, or a good movie, or an inspirational movie, or some type of drama or thriller, do not watch this movie. You probably will not make it through it. It is a very dark and haunting movie. Psalm 88 is kind of that. It is often labeled the darkest psalm in all of Scripture. It maintains a persistent tone of sorrow. And unlike some of the other lament psalms that we have been walking through, it ends without any hope, without any praise, without resolution. And the inclusion of Psalm 88 in the biblical narrative, in the biblical text, reminds us that God invites raw and honest faith, even when it looks at times like despair and hopelessness and angst. The psalm is attributed to this guy that's called Heman the Ezraite. And this is not to be confused with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Any more 80s people out there? He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. This is He-Man the Ezraite. He was a wise man and a musician from the line of Korah, which was the kind of priestly family that was in charge of temple worship. If we're putting it in modern terms, he was a worship leader. He was in charge of writing songs and leading worship in the temple. There's no specific historical context for this psalm, but the tone of the psalm lets us know it was most likely written during a time of long-term, ongoing personal suffering or illness or isolation and even depression. So what does a dark and kind of melancholy psalm like this teach us? Let's walk through it together, and then we'll circle back in the end, obviously, to the gospel. Let's jump in At verse 1 again, Psalm 88. O Lord, the God of my salvation, I cry out day and night before you. Let my prayer come before you. Incline your ear to my cry. For my soul is full of troubles. My life draws near to Sheol. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am a man who has no strength, like one set loose among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, like those whom you remember no more, for they are cut off from your hand. You have put me in the depths of the pit, in the regions dark and deep. Your wrath lies heavy on me. You overwhelm me with all your waves. You have caused my companions to shun me. You have made me a horror to them. I am shut in so that I cannot escape. My eye grows dim through sorrow. I mean, you can see right out of the gate the tone of this psalm is very different from some of the ones that we've been looking at. And this opening section of Psalm 88 reminds us of this very human truth that prolonged suffering is common in life. Should come up on the screen any moment now. There we are. Prolonged suffering is common. Prolonged suffering in this broken world is common. Heman cries out day and night. His suffering is not short-lived. It's not temporary. It is continual. It is persistent. He is enduring, from all indications, a lifetime of anguish. And a lifetime of anguish can shape your view. It can shape your perspective of God. It can shape your perspective of life. The psalmist describes here emotional, physical, and relational isolation. In verse 5, he feels like he's living among the dead. In other words, I'm marked for death. There's no hope in this state I'm in. Verse 6, he feels abandoned by God. Now, verse 8, he says he feels like all of his friends have been taken from him, have abandoned him. And prolonged suffering is a harsh reality of the broken world in which we live. That people often suffer for months, for years, even decades of time. That grief and sickness and depression and unanswered prayers and heartache and shame and guilt, that all of these things that weigh heavy on our soul, that weigh heavy on our physical bodies, our mental state of health, all of these things, they can go on for extended seasons of time. I mean, if you've been at City Church for more than a minute, you know that we lost my mother about, must have been the middle of April, so about 5 or 6 weeks ago now. And for off and on of 16 plus years, Mom was facing some type of treatment or dealing with some type of cancer, or even we thought she was cancer-free. There was kind of always the mental anguish of, is it going to come back? Is it still there? What's going on? And so that was a somewhat of a prolonged time of suffering that lasted for years of time. That's the reality of the broken human experience, isn't it? We all know people that have been through extended periods of time. And Psalm 88 gives language to that, language to the voiceless, to those who feel alone, those who feel abandoned, those who feel hopeless, those who do not see a light at the end of the tunnel, those who do not see the end in sight. That prolonged suffering in a broken world is common. Pick up at the end of verse 9. Every day I call upon you, Lord. I spread out my hands to you. Do you work wonders for the dead? Do the departed rise up to praise you? Is your steadfast love declared in the grave? Your faithfulness in Abdon or hell itself? Are your wonders known in the darkness, or your righteousness in the land of the forgetfulness? But I, O Lord, cry to you. In the morning my prayer comes before you. O Lord, why do you cast my soul away? Why do you hide your face from me? This section of Psalm 88 reminds us not only this idea that prolonged suffering is common, but we're also reminded that during these seasons of prolonged suffering, it may appear that God is not even listening, that God is not even there, that God is removed. And so not only do we potentially face prolonged seasons of suffering, but during these seasons of suffering, it may seem that God is silent, that God is removed from us. That's the words here in Psalm 88, that he prays even though he's not even certain that God is even listening. And he questions God not so much out of rebellion, but in desperation. Where are you, O God? Very important statement. God can be sovereign and silent at the same time. God can be sovereign and silent at the same time. We talk about God's sovereignty a lot here at City Church. We're a big God theology church, meaning we believe in a big God who is sovereign over all. And that means that God's in control. That means there's nothing catches him off guard, nothing takes him by surprise. He's in control of all things, that God is sovereign over all the earth, all the way down to our individual human affairs. That's a really big God. But the scriptures teach us that not only is this God sovereign and really big, but that God can be sovereign and completely silent during certain seasons of life. That God can intervene, but he doesn't always do so, does he? So what do we do with this tension? What do we do with the tension that we believe and serve a really big God who at times may be completely silent and feel removed? Some of you need to hear this, what I'm about to say right now. Asking honest questions to God, of God, is not sinful. It's not wrong. Asking God honest, sincere questions is not wrong. Here's what we've been learning throughout this whole series. God can handle our why questions, can he? God can handle our where are you questions. God can handle our how long, O Lord questions. We've seen all of these questions asked as we've made our way through these desert psalms, and we've realized that God is really sovereign, really big, and God can handle our human questions. Lament that we've been talking about, lament, which is kind of this grieving, suffering idea. And these lament psalms express that. These lament expresses the struggle of the human heart. It expresses the struggle of the human heart that lives in a world marked by sin and suffering. Lament allows us to express what it means to struggle, what it means to live in a broken world with an incomplete, imperfect heart and soul, and that God is okay with our questions. And we see that in Psalm 88. So let's continue with the last part of this text, verse 15. Afflicted and close to death from my youth up. This is ongoing stuff, right? I suffer your terrors. I am helpless. Your wrath has swept over me. Your dreadful assaults destroy me. They surround me like a flood all day long. They close in on me together. You have caused my beloved and my friend to shun me. My companions have become darkness. The last word of Psalm 88 is darkness. That describes the psalm. And we're reminded in this last section, not only this idea of prolonged suffering, these seasons where it seems that God is silent, but we're also reminded here from the psalmist that loneliness can be a lifelong, ongoing struggle, that feelings of loneliness can last a lifetime. And Heman describes this lifelong struggle in which God feels distant, even cruel at times. And he's engulfed. Did you notice that language? He's in the flood language, that he is engulfed in darkness with no end in sight. This is heavy stuff, isn't it? That weight, those feelings of being engulfed, of your soul being overwhelmed and flooded by whatever suffering or grief you may be facing. We say here at City Church fairly regularly, like we don't want to pretend about what it means to live out our faith in a broken world. And part of that reality is that darkness can persist. Darkness can persist for, listen, faithful believers. That darkness can go on. And Psalm 88 expresses feelings of abandonment and despair, and it reminds us that such experiences are a part of the human condition, and they can be a part of our spiritual journey. This psalm does not end in hope. It does not end in a resolution. And yet there it is, right in our Bible. Psalm 88. It's written, it's prayed, it's expressed, and yes, it's part of God's inspired word. There it is. And it teaches us that it's okay to say to God, God, this feels like too much for me. I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this anymore. You see, faith does not always, listen, feel victorious. Faith does not always feel victorious. Sometimes faith just feels and looks like not giving up. Sometimes faith is just holding on. And let me say quickly, holding on sometimes is the holiest thing that you can do. Is just hold on. Cries of desperation, this psalm reminds us, are still prayers of faith, aren't they? Cries of desperation are still prayers of faith. And this psalm reminds us that we are not alone in our darkness, that God is still present even when He is silent. So let's circle this back to the gospel, because all the psalms take us to the gospel. They're taking us to Jesus. What are some gospel takeaways from Psalm 88? This one, very important. God welcomes honest darkness. God welcomes honest darkness. That last sentence in this psalm is just so haunting. My companions, other translations say, my friend has become darkness. My friend is darkness. Like, those are some haunting words, aren't they? As a matter of fact, I typed that into Chat GPT this week, just to see what it would pull up. My friend has become darkness. And the response that I got was like, are you suicidal right now? Like, that, it was like, what's going on? Like, I'm trying to clean up my Chat GPT. Like, happy day, happy thoughts, happy thoughts. These dark words are the final words of this psalm, and they are words of absolute desperation and deep despair. And I kind of joke about that, but when you read this, this is the language of suicidal people. That darkness is the only thing I can see, that there's no way out. That darkness is my closest friend. And it reminds us that God welcomes our most desperate and honest prayers. The inclusion of such a raw and honest prayer speaks to God's empathy and His willingness to engage us in our deepest sorrows. Again, something that some of you need to hear from me today. Deep struggle, deep anguish, these are not always indicators of faithlessness or hopelessness. Matter of fact, it can be a form of faith. It can be holding on to God in our most absolute darkest moments. And that's the only thing that we can muster, is just enough faith to hold on. The gospel, here's what I love about the gospel. The gospel does not demand that we clean up, listen, our emotions before coming to God. We talk a lot about we don't have to clean ourselves up. He meets us right where we are. Sometimes we don't drill down on what that means emotionally, do we? That we don't have to have our life pulled together, that we don't have to get rid of all this anxiety and fear and worry that we're struggling with before we come to Him, that I don't have to have all my A, B's, and C's in a row, and I don't have to have my T's crossed and my I's dotted, and I'm mentally stable and healthy and my emotions are under control. No, the gospel, the invitation of the gospel is you come to me as you are, and that doesn't mean we have to clean up our emotions before we come running to God. You can come to Jesus broken. You can come to Jesus doubting. You can come to Jesus struggling and questioning. You can come to Jesus in deep despair. And the good news of the gospel is He will not turn you away. The cross reveals that God is not afraid of our deepest pain. As a matter of fact, He enters it with us in the good news of the gospel. What about this? This gospel takeaway from Psalm 88. Jesus took the ultimate darkness for us. Jesus took the ultimate darkness for us on the cross. Psalm 88 prophetically mirrors the suffering of Jesus. The suffering of Jesus, who was cut off from his Father's care. He was put into the lowest pit of despair on the cross. He was abandoned by his friends. He was forsaken. He was betrayed. Jesus experienced Psalm 88 fully and completely. And because Jesus fully experienced and took on Psalm 88, because of what Jesus did, we can know that our darkness is never the end of the story. That darkness does not win because Jesus took the darkness upon himself. You may feel abandoned, but Jesus was literally abandoned in your place so that you will never be abandoned, even if you feel it. Jesus died in darkness so that you can walk in light. About this, the gospel, the good news of the gospel gives us permission. It gives us permission to lament, to express our suffering and our sorrow and our hurt and our grief. The gospel does not erase the reality of suffering. It shapes how we endure suffering. It shapes how we see suffering, how we view suffering. I love this. Psalm 88 reminds us you don't need to fake it. You don't need to put on a face of joy when it's not there. You don't have to put on the smile all the time. We have space in our journey for lament. We have space for suffering. We have space for struggle. We have space for the wrestling. And we have space without shame or without guilt. The church, I'll speak specifically to us who gather in these walls, City Church should be a safe place for honest grief and honest despair. So just from stage to you, hear me say, you have permission to lament. You have permission to wrestle and struggle and walk through suffering and not always have it together and not always have to fake it and put on the smile. Jesus himself wept. Jesus is the man of sorrows. The gospel gives you permission to lament and struggle and fear and doubt and wrestle and ask, how long? Why? I don't know if I can take this anymore. That's the reality of the human experience, and that's where the gospel meets us. All right, we got just a couple more. One, next to the last one. In Christ, I say this every week, but we have to hear it throughout this series weekly. In Christ, we are never truly alone. We are not alone. Psalm 88 ends in darkness. The word darkness. There's no turning point here. It ends in darkness. But the gospel assures us that God's presence remains even when we can't feel it, even in his silence. And we know that because Christ experienced the ultimate darkness on the cross for us. And his divine identification with us assures us that Christ not only understands our pain, but he has overcome it. That in him we have hope and redemption. In Christ, you are never alone. And then the last one from Psalm 88, gospel takeaways. And this is not always easy to hear, difficult to believe at times, but our suffering is redemptive. It's redeeming. Suffering is a path to spiritual growth and maturity. And maintaining faith amid adversity fosters and develops a deeper and more resilient relationship with God. I love the beauty of the gospel that says God does not waste our pain. He repurposes it. And we learn to view our trials and our suffering in light of eternity, where we believe that ultimate restoration and joy awaits those who follow Christ. A few years ago, a group of spelunkers. Got any spelunkers in here? You know what spelunkers are? It's cave explorers. So you could just call yourself a cave explorer. A few years ago, a group of cave explorers, spelunkers, official title, in Tennessee, they descended into a very complex cave system. And as they explored, a sudden, unexpected flood came and cut off their exit. Hours lost in this cave system turned into days. Their headlamps started to die. The darkness was overwhelming. Soon the darkness was so thick that they could no longer see even their hand in front of their face. And they're in this dark, deep, complex cave system. Some survived, and one survivor later said about the darkness this statement: "It was the kind of darkness that didn't just surround you. It was a darkness that got inside of you." Psalm 88 is like that cave. Most psalms of lament have a turning point. I was dark, weighty, heavy. And then there's a turning point usually in the psalm. But I will hope in you. But I will trust in you. But I will rest in you. But not Psalm 88. Psalm 88 does not have one. There's no sunrise. There's no happy ending. There's no clear answer. There's no emotional resolution. It's just that haunting final line: darkness is my closest friend. And this psalm teaches us that there's space in the heart of God for people who are suffering without answers and without hope. That God inspired this psalm to be prayed. And that means that you can bring even your darkest thoughts to Him, your depression, your doubt, your despair, that you are not disqualified from His grace because you're in the cave. That even though Psalm 88 ends in darkness, listen, the redemptive story of Jesus does not. It does not end in the darkness. That Jesus Himself stepped into the utter darkness on the cross and cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But through that darkness came light. Through that death came resurrection. That God doesn't always remove us from the cave, but He does meet us in the cave. And that through Christ, He promises darkness will not have the last and final word, because we are gospel people. We are resurrection people. That there is light on the other side of the darkness. That suffering is redemptive. So hear me today. We're going to gather around this table, and we're going to take juice, and we're going to take bread, and we're going to, as we talked about last week or two, the taste and see, right? We're going to take it into ourselves physically, and we're going to do so in an act of worship that reminds us physically with actual bread and actual juice that Jesus is with us and in us, and no matter what we face, we can taste and see His goodness even when darkness is our friend. That He is real and He is near and He is present even when He is silent. Let's bow our heads for prayer.